The spoon stopped 3 centimeters from my lips because my phone lit up like a small urgent sun. Don't eat the cake. Trust me. The message bubbled from my brother Lucas, who impossibly was sitting 2 chairs down and looking at me like he'd swallowed a secret. My throat went bone dry. For a second I thought, prank. Then I looked up. Raphael, my husband, lifted his wine glass and smiled, the practiced glossy smile that used to make my knees weak. Around the table, lights were soft, voices were warm. My in-laws played their parts perfectly. The father who told the same joke, the aunt who passed the salad, Clara Raphael's ex laughing too loud in the corner like a crown sat on her head. The house smelled like sugar and citrus, and my chest tightened with a cold I'd carried since I left the hospital 3 months earlier. I didn't tell you this yet. I am Isabella Ferreira, and 3 months before that dinner, I nearly didn't come back. A sudden, severe infection put me in the ICU for a week. It took my strength, my sleep, and a chunk of my confidence. It left me fragile in public and furious in private. People said, "Get well soon," and then kept their distance. My in-laws insisted on a family celebration to show I was okay. Everyone clapped and smiled and acted as if nothing had been taken. Lucas mouthed something I couldn't see. My mother-in-law, Dr. Marta Almeida, a woman revered in our circle as the family's steward of proper behavior, clasped both hands together like a prayer and watched me like a hawk. My stomach turned. I slid the phone into my lap, forced a smile, and kept the fork at bay. The message had been simple and impossible to ignore. Not eating would be rude. Eating could be dangerous. Which side of that coin was true? I had no idea. But I did know one thing for certain in that breath. I was suddenly not safe at my own table. I needed proof. Not a hunch, not a feeling proof. So I did the thing people do in movies and feel embarrassed to admit in real life. I positioned my phone on the table with the camera angled, accidentally just so. Audio on, for small talk. And while everyone laughed and told the same old family anecdotes, I pretended to sip and cough and eventually excuse myself to the bathroom, all while cradling a small corner of cake in a napkin and slipping it into my purse like contraband. Standing in the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror, pale under fluorescent light, a ghost of who I used to be, and I started writing. Not a social media apology or some passive post. I opened a blank document and typed name by name. Who was present, what they said, where their hands moved. When grief and fear had cleaned out my insides at the hospital, they hadn't left me helpless. They left me hyper-attentive. I would turn that attention into armor. 2 minutes later, I walked out of that bathroom with evidence hidden and a level of calm I didn't feel. I knew the dinner had a purpose. I didn't yet know whose, but I knew someone at that table was willing to do more than humiliate me. Someone at that table might be willing to hurt me. When I opened my bag in the car, the napkin had a smudge of powdered sugar and a faint line of something else. I froze. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. The voice on the line wasn't a friend. It was an investigator who said 3 words that made the blood roar in my ears. You're in danger. Hiding in plain sight is an art. For years, I'd internalized the family rules and believed I belonged there. Sunday lunches, birthday toasts, holiday photos. Yet I grew up knowing our family rotated around a single axis, the family house in Villa Madalena, the one with the narrow doorway and the lemon tree out back. It's where weddings appeared in sepia photos, where arguments were later smoothed by coffee. It was the house you fought for when you believed legacy trumped decency. That's the financial heartbeat Marta kept bragging about at parties. We are the family that holds their house, she'd say in a tone that made generosity sound like ledger management. I was happy. Once. I loved Raphael. We bought furniture, painted a bedroom in dove gray, picked out plants, and made plans. Then came my illness, then a strange coldness in his voice, then an accident at work that left me alone on weekends. The first reveal came 2 nights after the dinner. I sat at our kitchen table with the lights low and my laptop open. I had told myself I wouldn't snoop, but the house felt like a foreign apartment and my hands moved like a detective's. I opened Raphael's email, an act I hated in principle but would justify as survival in practice. The subject lines were minor at first, coffee receipts, a dentist appointment, then a thread that turned my stomach, a private email address I'd never seen connected to Clara. Dates matched my hospitalization, timestamps when I was in the ER and couldn't answer the phone. The messages were casual, almost bored. She'll break when she loses her job, one read. Another, we'll wait, best time is when she's alone. My chest tightened so badly I could hardly breathe. I found an email with the line, wait until she's weak, she won't fight. That wasn't a guess, that was planning. 2 days later, the second reveal fell into my lap by accident. I received a banking notification a small transfer had bounced back to someone I recognized. I printed the statement because people who plan need printouts and circled the tens of thousands movement of money to an account in Mariana Moreira's name, a cousin I thought was distant. The transfers lined up with meetings, with days I was at doctor's appointments, and with a messy divorce that Clara had bargained through months before our wedding. Each new discovery hardened something in me. This wasn't just petty jealousy, it was a network. A web woven with careful threads, whispers to lawyers, donations to clinics, suggestions to friends, in small, purposeful ways to isolate me. The pieces snapped into a pattern. They weren't only planning to push me out of my home, they were preparing to erase me from the narrative of our family altogether. I printed everything and put it in a folder. As I turned to leave, there was a sticky note stuck to the inside of the laptop screen. "You should go home, it's safer." The handwriting was not mine. It wasn't Raphael's, it looked eerily like Marta's. The investigator's voice was gravel and efficiency. He introduced himself as Marco Silva and said 3 things calmly that made the rest of the apartment breathe with cold. He'd seen my file before, my family had a pattern, and I needed to be careful. He asked me to send him anything I had, emphasized caution, and told me to never eat anything I didn't personally prepare at home. Another evidence, a photo I'd found on Raphael's laptop, him hugging Clara in the parking lot of the clinic where Marta volunteered. They were smiling in a way spouses don't smile at exes. Confronting this felt like stepping into a swamp. I emailed Marcos the screenshots, the bank statements, the anonymous notes. He replied that night, "We've logged 2 similar complaints involving that family pattern. We're opening an inquiry." He told me to get lab analyses on that cake. I didn't even know where to start. That's when I remembered the napkin in my purse. I took the cake remnant to a private lab under a fake name because in this country evidence matters and official channels move slow. The lab called 2 days later. There's an unusual compound consistent with chronic low-dose exposure to a sedative. Not lethal at those levels, but cumulative. The word cumulative was a punch. Small doses over time to make someone sick, forgetful, blamed for being fragile. That was the strategy. It was terrifyingly elegant. Third evidence. The lab report confirming a sedative trace in the cake. I felt panic like a drum. Then I felt the other thing. Focus. They thought I was weak and would crumble. They were wrong. I had 2 advantages they didn't expect: access to technology and a memory shaped by fear that made me meticulous. I bought a few items I never thought I'd own: tiny Wi-Fi cameras, an encrypted hard drive, and a burner phone. I learned to log everything like a forensic student. As I scrolled the footage that first night, a clip stopped me cold in the kitchen, smiling into the camera, pouring tea, then pausing as if to drop something into the pot. Her hand was casual, practiced. She looked like a woman making tea for a guest she planned to poison, and the camera blinked out of the clip as if someone had noticed it too. Once you realize a private war exists, you stop living in small increments. You start moving in patterns, setting snares, and choosing allies with surgical care. I briefed my lawyer, a woman named Rosa, who smelled of strong coffee and righteous impatience. She told me to keep everything secret. "Publicity burns fast, Issa," she said. "We make sure the flames reach where they need to." I started circulating pieces of the dossier to trusted people, a single encrypted folder to an ethical journalist friend, a redacted packet to an independent investigator Marcos trusted, a printout to a hospital compliance officer who owed me a favor. Small reveals at this stage were tactical. I let a whisper seed itself here, a thread pull there, an unsigned note in a community forum hinting at a family pattern. People began to notice. My sister-in-law Camila, the one who always looked conflicted around her mother, slipped me a flash drive at a grocery store and said, "If anything happens, use this." The drive contained an audio file, Raphael speaking to an unknown number about clearing obstacles around the family estate. The voice was his and the hushed board cadence he used when detached. He didn't say any legal crimes, he spoke like someone discussing logistics, but the implication was brutal: money, silence, and convenience. Things accelerated. A complaint from an anonymous whistleblower hit the hospital's board. A subpoena quietly arrived at an ex's address. Clara's accountant got a call from a federal auditor. Each domino fall felt orchestrated and quiet. The world watched, and the family's perfect social picture cracked. One morning, an unmarked envelope stuck to my windshield contained a grainy CCTV still of the night. I had been hospitalized 2 years earlier, except someone else's car was parked outside the clinic, and a timestamp showed a transaction. 2 days before the doctor's note that blamed me for emotional instability. Someone was tracing histories, someone was telling me there was more to this than food and gossip. Revenge has to be both moral and theatrical. I wasn't trying to humiliate for humiliation's sake. I wanted justice, and I wanted the entire pattern revealed so no one else could be eroded quietly. My idea was deceptively simple. Recreate the conditions that produced the harm, but under a camera I controlled. I invited them, every single one, to a reconciliation dinner at my place. I cooked. The menu was innocuous. The wine inexpensive, the playlist neutral. What I didn't tell them was that I had prepared two things they never counted on: the kitchen camera angle they couldn't tamper with, and a second recorder that captured conversation transcriptions in real time to a secure cloud. Marta arrived with a box of pastries, theatrically innocent, and chatted in that doctored honey voice. She moved too slowly around the counter, ostensibly to help. At 9:14 p.m., she reached in, accidentally brushed the sugar bowl in the direction of my plate. My throat closed, but I kept smiling. The camera caught the precise movement. A small white flake, not sugar. A vinegary odor a beat later. There are moments when your body wants to bolt. My entire plan required that I didn't. During dessert, as they chuckled about the old family dog, Raphael's phone buzzed. Without thinking, I looked at the notification and saw a message preview, everything ready, she's under. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the message read like confirmation. I didn't raise a hand, I raised a glass, smiled toasts, and later, while they talked, I quietly uploaded the footage to 3 journalists and the investigator who told me to be careful. Watching the fallout that night was a new type of adrenaline. Clara's eyes went wide when the journalist called the next morning. An anonymous post rippled through social groups and local message boards with hints. There's a pattern, watch the sweets. Suddenly, friends who had been quiet began to ask questions. A neighbor who used to invite Marta to church tea was suddenly distant. The chorus of small reveals had done what I needed. They fractured the family's veneer. But that evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, I brewed myself. An email arrived that made my stomach fall out of my body. An old patient file from a private clinic had been mailed to the journalist dated 7 years prior, and it bore a signature I recognized in a way that stunned me. You think the worst of betrayal is what's most recent. You're wrong. Sometimes the worst is the slow architecture of lies that reaches back years, even decades. The file was thin, 70 lines of clinical notes, curt observations, a diagnosis, emotional instability. The kicker, the file referenced an assessment called parenting eligibility, dated months before I had even met Raphael. It had my full name, my ID number, a clinic header I didn't know, and a signature I knew very well, Draw Marta Almeida, my mother-in-law. This was no coincidence or bureaucratic error. This was a manufactured dossier built to delegitimize and to later be used as leverage. I felt my lungs shrink. This file painted me as unfit for motherhood and set it quietly to parties who decide custody, inheritance, and reputation. When I called the clinic under a false name, the receptionist's voice held a hesitation that confirmed the file existed, but that access had been managed. The journalist cross-referenced the file with public registry data and found a donor with ties to a small medical foundation, a foundation with an old, inactive website but with large bank deposits, and one particular legal trustee, Rodrigo Duarte, the family's long-trusted attorney. A ledger trace leaked showed an offshore transfer timed 2 days before my hospitalization, years prior, payment to the same clinic where my file had been generated. The transfer's beneficiary name resolved to a shell company with common directors connected to Rodrigo. This was no longer family cruelty. It was organized, professional manipulation, forged medical paperwork, paid clinics, legal cover. Marta was not the master puppeteer, she was a functionary. The real architect was a quieter, more dangerous man, the lawyer who had always fixed paperwork, who had been present for convenient legal signings, and who now had footprints across foundations and bank accounts. Once the journalist published that link, Rodrigo's calls stopped. The family's calls stopped. The institution that had protected them loosened its grip. 2 days later, a voicemail arrived at my burner phone. A calm male voice said, "You're poking a hornet's nest. Stop now and you'll keep your house." Then the line went dead. The message had the opposite effect I think they intended. It hardened my resolve. When a system collapses, it's rarely a single brick. It's the collection of small cracks, the cake, the emails, the bank transfers, the forged file, each one pried out and set where the world could see. That's what we did. The journalist published the first long piece, evidence, timelines, interviews with 2 women who'd had files altered, and a map of the money. The network had been a business built on erasing inconvenient women. The public response was volcanic. Social media lit up. A local NGO for women's rights called for inquiries. The hospital launched an internal review. Rodrigo Duarte, the lawyer, tried to suppress the articles with cease and desist letters. They backfired. The prosecutor's office confirmed they were opening a criminal probe into falsified medical records and conspiracy. They issued subpoenas. Within 72 hours, accounts connected to the foundation were frozen. Within a week, Rodrigo's license was temporarily suspended, pending inquiry. Marta was forced to step down from positions she'd held for decades. Clara's social media accounts were scrubbed. She stopped attending weddings she used to dominate. I stood at the courthouse the day officials accepted my supplemental affidavit. Testifying was brutal. I sat with my folder, every email, every bank printout, the lab analyses, the kitchen footage, and presented everything with a calm I'd practiced in the mirror for months. People wept in the audience. There were hushed thanks after the hearing. Prosecutors told me my file had lit the path to other victims. A week after the indictments, an anonymous letter slid under my apartment door late at night. The handwriting was shaky. Inside it said simply, "We named our daughter after you." There was a photograph of a newborn sleeping with a tiny bracelet reading Isa. I cried 3 times that night, not for my loss, but for the fact my fight had helped strangers find safety. Revenge, when done cleanly, is quiet. It's evidence, patience, and the law doing its slow work. It's not fireworks, it's freezing of accounts, disbarment hearings, and the small, private reclaiming of ordinary things. I moved into the house the lawyer said was legally mine, a result of an old deed my grandmother had left in a sealed note naming me the steward of the family property if certain conditions of character were met. It felt strange to sleep in rooms that had once been charged with betrayal. I don't pretend it healed everything. Some names are forever marked. The person who loved me most in that family now sends apologies that arrive like wind on paper. Raphael's voice on the phone is thin and full of things that sound like regret but read like entitlement. I don't answer most of them. I went to therapy again, but with a different therapist this time, a woman who helped me unpack the twin weights of grief and righteous anger. Months later, a minister from a legal foundation called to say my testimony reopened cases for 3 other women whose files had been altered. That's the vindication that sits quietly inside me. Justice didn't obliterate the past, but it prevented the same machinery from being used the same way again. The real payoff wasn't a headline or a courtroom victory. It was a small morning last spring when I walked into the garden, a cup of coffee warm in my hands, and a neighbor waved across the street with genuine familiarity. A woman from the neighborhood approached and slipped a note into my palm. It read, "Thank you for being loud when they tried to hush us." I planted new lemon trees that season. I started writing not to publish headlines, but to keep my memory intact. I volunteer with an organization that helps women fight medical falsifications and clerical abuses. Sometimes I wake with nightmares. Sometimes I still flinch at casual kindnesses. But the house breathes with me now. It's mine in a way that matters. One night, months after Rodrigo's indictment, a voice note through my burner phone, a single line, "She wasn't alone." I smiled because I knew what that meant now. I had been part of a chorus women who once whispered now shouted, and the echo could not be silenced.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one of the left and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.